Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam and this week we are looking at one of my very favourite artists, David Bowie. David Bowie was a local lad. He was born a short bus ride that way and he spent the early part of his career a short bus ride that way. We're only going to look at his pre-1980s output today. Of course, he made some excellent records outside of the 60s and 70s, and we're going to look at all of those another time. But I think the 70s particularly was such a productive, fertile, creative time for him, and his consistency level was incredibly high, and he was so prolific over that short decade. He made 11 records in the 70s alone. But let's get straight into it. At number 13, I'm going to put David Bowie, his debut album from 1967. This is most famous for The Laughing Gnome and a lot of Anthony Newley, Tommy Steele influenced songs. They're all pretty thin. There's some fairly lame rhythm and blues on there, and he's really finding his feet as an artist. So this is a very easy record to put at the bottom of the pile. At number 12, Pin-Ups. This is a covers album he made. It was his 7th album. He made it in 1973 with most of the Spiders from Mars. Woody Woodmansey had left by now, the drummer, and was replaced by Ainsley Dunbar. But the band still rocks, and there's some really good covers on here. Friday on My Mind is really good. A couple of really cracking Who covers. It's most famous for Sorrow, which was a song he kept in his set for quite a long time afterwards. But not having any original Bowie stuff on it makes it quite easy to put fairly low on the list. Number 11, Space Oddity. Now, Space Oddity is his 1969, probably first fully formed record. Famous for the title track, of course. It's full of really lovely acoustic songs like Letter to Hermione, Memory of a Free Festival. It's very well worth investigating if you're interested in the early Bowie stuff, away from the sort of guitars and the drums and everything, because it is very light and very of its time, but I think there's some really lovely stuff on there. Number 10, Lodger. This was the third of the Berlin trilogy that he made with Brian Eno. This was his 13th album, came out in 1979. It's got DJ and Boys Keep Swinging on it. They were the singles, but there's some other really good stuff here, like Fantastic Voyage. The songs are quite odd and quirky. Red Sails, Money, Assassin. They're kind of very, very deep cuts. But there's some good stuff, but it kind of doesn't hold together as an album. It doesn't seem to have a uniform vibe or feel about it, which, looking at the cover, I think perhaps is maybe deliberate. Number 9, Station to Station. This was Bowie's 10th album, 1976. This starts sort of very cold, oppressive record. Starts with the sort of chugging of the train, and there's a very Eastern European feel about this whole record. Most famous for Golden Years, TVC15. So the mood does lighten up and gets a little bit funky. And it actually finishes with Wild as the Wind, which, although it's a cover, is one of Bowie's very, very best vocals. At number 8, I've put Heroes. Now, Heroes was the second of the Berlin trilogy albums. 1977, Bowie's 12th album. Of course, it's famous for Heroes, the incredible title track, which has guitar maestro Robert Fripp from King Crimson playing that wonderful line over the top. I keep coming back to this album and hearing new things. It's really interesting because I know it so well, but I'm always returning to it and going, oh yeah, kind of, I like that, and I might not have liked it so much before. So this is an album I've known and loved for decades, and it's still growing on me, so that can only be a good thing. But only 8th in this list because the quality of the albums after it is very, very high indeed. Number 7, Aladdin Sane. Bowie's 6th album from 1973. This is kind of the last of the sort of Ziggy period albums, and it's the last record he made with all the Spiders from Mars. He's added Mike Garson on piano at this point, who was a jazz pianist, and you can hear his influence all over the playing. It's on Time, it's on the title track. The album's most famous perhaps for Gene Genie, but there's some really good deep cuts in here. There's Drive-In Saturday, Panic in Detroit. You can hear that Bowie's kind of maybe getting a little bit tired of the whole Ziggy, Aladdin Sane persona, and it's really time to move on to pastures new. The music is the jazz piano and everything. Am I a huge fan of it? Not a huge fan, but I can take it in small doses, and I like it on this album in context. Number 6, Diamond Dogs. This is Bowie's 8th album from 1974. Famous for a sort of very strange cover, which you'd have to check out, just up there. This was a concept album, really. He was trying to present some kind of Orwellian dystopian future through the music, and the stage set at the time reflected all of that. Most famous for Rebel Rebel in 1984, but I prefer stuff like Sweet Thing and Candidate. I think there's more depth. They sort of draw you in, but there's more layers to those songs. Bowie played most of the guitar on this album himself and did a pretty good job. But by now he was really looking for where his next sort of group of musicians were going to come from. And I think on the record he's kind of missing the Spiders from Mars a little bit. And they are on cracking form on my record, which is at number 5, which might be a surprise that it's so high for some of you. But it's The Man Who Sold the World. This was his third album from 1971, and it's the first album he did with Mick Ronson, who became a hugely influential character in Bowie's early career in the early 70s. A brilliant guitar player and musician, and arranger. And he's on fire on this record. He plays Width of a Circle, Man Who Sold the World, Running Gun Blues, After All. I mean, Superman, there's some great guitar playing on here. Tony Visconti's on bass, because Trevor Bolder hadn't joined the Spiders on bass yet. This album has a sort of, it's got a dark sort of sexy Rocky Horror campy appeal to it, because Bowie was still playing with this kind of androgynous image at the time. In fact, he was very much in its early stages. He was developing it, and I like that about this record. It's also got a lot of references to madness and insanity, and some of you may know that Bowie's brother was not very well up top, and had a big effect on Bowie's songwriting. But it's a great record. I like it very much, and also famous for the cover of Bowie in a dress on the front. Number 4, Young Americans from 1975, Bowie's 9th album. Bowie was brilliant at taking other trends and styles that were just beginning to break through and then appropriating them for his own music. And he did exactly that with Young Americans. He took on white soul, the Philly sound, the soul sound, and he did it brilliantly on this record. It's most famous for sort of Fame and the title track, Young Americans. But I love all the songs on this album, and it's one of the albums I go to back more than any other. Beautiful backing vocals from Luther Vandross, who Bowie discovered. And there's a big Lennon influence. He does a cover of Across the Universe, and Lennon co-writes Fame. But a bigger influence on this album, and more important influence, is Carlos Alomar, who was another great guitar player and arranger, who Bowie had finally found someone to replace Mick Ronson. And Carlos Alomar became Bowie's right-hand man for quite a few years now. And he's all over this album, and he sounds great. He's funky, and he's cool, and his licks are great. Number 3, and some of you may be surprised that this is so low, but I'm going to put The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Rolling Stone voted this the most influential album of the 70s, and you can see why. It's an incredible record. There's so many great songs on here, loosely based around the idea of a sort of interstellar rock star coming down to Earth and being destroyed by his fans. It's got, of course, Starman on it, which is one of the all-time iconic David Bowie songs. It's got Ziggy Stardust. It's got Suffragette City. The Spiders from Mars now are really gelling. They sound amazing on this record. There's some brilliant Mick Ronson playing. Look out the solo and Moon Age Daydream, Suffragette City. It's one of those records where the cover, the atmosphere, the songs, the vibe, it just all comes together in a really beautiful package. And many times I feel this is the best David Bowie record, and then I sort of think about other ones and I think, wow, God, there's a lot of competition. But this is possibly the go-to record for Bowie and his iconography of Ziggy and all of that stuff that happened in the early 70s. Number 2, I'm going to put Low, which was the first of the Berlin trilogy. It was actually, most of this was recorded in France. This is an extraordinary record. It's a unique record. I don't know any record like it. You've got one side which is just, short, sharp, quirky songs with really interesting melodies and instrumentation and experimentation and sounds. And then they kind of frantically race by, and then it spills into this beautiful sort of ambient second side of the record, which is it's unsettling, it's eerie, but it's alluring and compelling at the same time. The second side certainly has Brian Eno's fingerprints all over it, but the first side, probably most famous for sound and vision, I don't think there's a bad song on it. He absolutely hits the bullseye with every one of them. Always Crashing in the Same Car, Speed of Life, Be My Wife, Breaking Glass. This is a record that I think Bowie fans know very well, and those in the know, will always acclaim this as one of the best Bowie albums. I think people who don't know Bowie so well come to this one a lot later, but it's an absolute gem, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't come across it before. But that leaves us with our number 1 album of pre-1980s David Bowie output, and it's going to be Hunky Dory, which may not surprise some of you. I just adore this record. It's Bowie's 4th album from 1971, and again, the Spiders are on this, and I think the Spiders from Mars are really one of Britain's most underrated rock and roll bands. I think they were in Bowie's shadow so much that they never really got the acclaim that they deserved. They're augmented on this album by Rick Wakeman from Yes on piano, and he makes a crucial contribution on quite a few of the songs, particularly Life on Mars, which is an extraordinary composition. It keeps modulating and changing key all over the place. I'm sure you know the song. It's absolutely beautiful, but it's a great piece of songwriting. There are so many songs on this record which are now part of the David Bowie fabric in our culture. Oh You Pretty Things, Changes, Life on Mars. But there are such great other songs on here. You've got Quicksand, you've got the Boulez Brothers, Queen Bitch, and then you have these charming, sweet songs, Kooks and Feel Your Heart, which just add a real glow of warmth to the whole record. And as you may know by now, I love a bit of warmth and sweetness on a record. Again, a beautiful cover. David Bowie's covers were wonderful. He made a joke about himself once in a video, saying his album covers were better than his records, which I'm not sure that's true, but his album covers certainly are brilliant, most of them. But there you go. That's my rundown, a quick one today, of David Bowie's pre-1980s output. Is my favourite David Bowie album in there? I don't know. Check back when I do the rest of his output very soon. But if you don't agree with me, please leave some comments below, subscribe, get an alert, keep it nice and sweet and clean, please. We're all friends here, just bantering about music. But I will see you again very soon for another episode of Rock Records Reviewed. Bye. Records Reviewed. Records Reviewed.